Millions died building the world's longest wall, but not in war, not in battle, and not even while defending. They died while building it. And the real reason will shock you, because this wall was never just about stopping enemies, it was about controlling fear, power, and human lives. So imagine this: thousands of years ago, across mountains, deserts, and frozen plains, an endless stone monster was rising, stretching for over 21,000 kilometers, longer than any structure ever built by humans. And every single stone came with a human cost, because emperors didn't ask for workers. They took them: farmers, prisoners, soldiers, even children, all forced into brutal labor. No choice, no escape, working in freezing winters and burning summers, lifting massive stones with bare hands, starving, collapsing, and dying on the spot. And when someone died, they weren't even given a grave. Their bodies were often buried inside the wall itself, turning the structure into a literal graveyard. And here's the twist: this wall, the Great Wall of China, wasn't built in one era. It took over 2,000 years to complete, with different dynasties adding new sections, each ruler trying to prove their power, their legacy, their control. But the people paid the price, millions of them. And most weren't even fighting enemies, they were fighting exhaustion, hunger, and the cruelty of their own rulers. And the biggest irony: the wall didn't even stop invasions completely. Enemies still found ways through, climbed over, or went around it. So all that suffering didn't guarantee safety, it only guaranteed obedience. And now here's the emotional punch. Today, tourists walk on the same stones, taking selfies, smiling, admiring the view, while beneath their feet lie the forgotten bones of the workers who never chose this fate. Their stories erased, their names lost, but their suffering permanently built into history. And the final truth is chilling. The world's longest wall isn't just a symbol of strength, it's a monument to human sacrifice, proving that the greatest structures on Earth are often built not with stone, but with lives. But what most people never realize is that the Great Wall wasn't just a wall. It was a system of fear, because behind those massive stones were labor camps that felt more like open-air prisons, where workers were chained together, watched by armed guards, and punished brutally for slowing down. And if someone collapsed from exhaustion, they weren't helped, they were replaced, because human lives were cheaper than time, and time was everything for the emperors who were obsessed with defending their borders, especially during the Qin dynasty, when Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered hundreds of thousands of people to work on the wall, including prisoners, political enemies, and even innocent villagers. And here's the terrifying part: many of these workers were sent on what was basically a death mission, because once they reached the remote mountains and deserts, escape was impossible, food was scarce, and medical care didn't exist. So injuries turned into infections, infections turned into death, and the wall kept growing, stone by stone, body by body. And the suffering didn't stop with physical pain, because families were torn apart, fathers never returned home, children grew up without parents, and entire villages lost their strongest workers, all for a structure most of them would never even see finished. And then came the Han dynasty, which expanded the wall even further, pushing construction into harsher terrain, where workers had to carry heavy materials across burning deserts and freezing winds, sometimes walking for days just to deliver one load of stone. And many collapsed along the way, their bodies left behind because the march could not stop. And here's another brutal truth: some sections of the wall were built using rammed earth mixed with human remains, not because it was symbolic, but because it was practical, as bones added strength to the structure, turning the wall into a literal blend of stone, soil, and death. And while the emperors celebrated their achievements, ordinary people whispered stories of ghosts haunting the wall, spirits of the workers who never found peace, and even soldiers stationed there reported hearing cries in the night, carried by the wind across the mountains, as if the wall itself remembered the pain it was built from. And yet, despite all this suffering, invasion still happened, because no wall can stop determination forever, and enemies adapted, bribing guards, finding weak points, or simply going around it, making the massive human sacrifice feel tragically pointless. And the final twist is this: what the wall really protected wasn't just the empire, it protected the power of the rulers, showing their people that resistance was useless, because if an emperor could move mountains, he could crush anyone who stood against him. And that's the hidden message carved into every stone of the Great Wall: obedience was built with blood. But the darkest chapter of the Great Wall's story isn't just about how people died, it's about how they were forgotten. Because once a worker collapsed and stopped moving, Their name disappeared forever. No records, no graves, no families informed. Just silence. And the wall kept rising, layer by layer, hiding millions of lost lives inside its foundation. And what makes this even more haunting is that many workers knew they would never return home. Yet they were forced to march into the mountains anyway, some walking hundreds of miles in chains, leaving behind parents, wives, children, and unborn futures. And along the way, people whispered that the wall was cursed, that anyone who touched it would lose something: freedom, family, or life itself. And those whispers grew louder when mass graves were discovered near construction sites, filled with skeletons, stacked like broken tools, proving that death wasn't an accident, it was part of the system. And here's the terrifying twist. Some ancient records suggest that officials intentionally overworked prisoners to death to save food. Because feeding a dead worker cost nothing, turning human beings into disposable resources. And when winter came, the suffering only grew worse, because workers had to build in freezing temperatures with no shelter, no warm clothing, and barely any food, their fingers cracking, their breath turning to ice, and many freezing to death while still holding their tools. And yet, the wall didn't stop growing, because every death was simply replaced by another body, another forced recruit, another victim of imperial ambition. And the emotional cost didn't stop with the workers, because back in the villages, families waited for years hoping their loved ones would return, but most never did. And some families even built fake graves just to have a place to cry, because there was no body to bury, no closure, only unanswered questions. And the wall became a symbol of endless separation. And then there were the soldiers stationed along the wall who were supposed to defend it. But many of them felt like prisoners too, isolated from civilization, watching over a structure built on suffering, listening to the wind howl through the towers like distant screams. And some wrote poems about the loneliness, the deaths, and the ghosts they believed walked beside. And over time, the wall gained a reputation not just as a defense system, but as a haunted scar across the land. And here's the cruel irony. While millions suffered, the emperors used the wall as propaganda, showing it off as proof of strength, unity, and greatness, while hiding the human cost behind stone and glory. And even today, textbooks often celebrate the wall's size and beauty without mentioning the pain it caused. But the truth is still there, locked inside every brick. Because structures don't remember, but history does. And the final reveal is this. The Great Wall didn't just protect China from enemies, it protected rulers from rebellion, because after seeing millions die for one command, the people learned a terrifying lesson. No one was too small to be sacrificed. And that is the real legacy of the world's longest wall. Not strength, not greatness, but the silent power of fear. But the story doesn't end when the last stone was placed, because the real aftermath of the Great Wall began after the workers were gone. When dynasties fell, emperors died, and the wall they believed would make them immortal was slowly abandoned, left to crumble under wind, rain, and time. And here's the cruel twist. Once its purpose faded, so did the memory of the people who built it, because history kept the names of emperors alive, but erased the names of the millions who carried the stones. And as centuries passed, parts of the wall were stripped apart by locals just trying to survive. Bricks reused for homes, farms, and roads, as if the wall itself was being consumed by the same people it once destroyed. And yet, even in decay, the wall never fully died, because legends kept it alive. Stories of spirits walking along it at night, of cries echoing through empty watchtowers, of travelers who felt watched even when no one was there. And whether those ghosts were real or not didn't matter, because the emotional weight of the wall was undeniable. And then came the modern age, when the Great Wall was reborn, not as a weapon, but as a symbol, a national icon, a tourist destination, a place of pride. And millions of visitors now walk where millions once collapsed, laughing, taking photos, admiring the view, rarely realizing that beneath their feet lies one of the largest mass graves in human history. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We celebrate the wall today because we admire greatness, scale, and achievement, but we struggle to face the cost, because admitting that the wall was built on suffering forces us to ask an unsettling question about ourselves. How often do civilizations trade human lives for power, security, and legacy? And the answer isn't locked in the past, because even today, massive projects rise around the world, praised as marvels of engineering, while the workers behind them remain invisible, underpaid, overworked, and forgotten. making the Great Wall less of an ancient story and more of a warning. And the final reveal hits hardest here. The wall failed at its original purpose. It couldn't permanently stop invasions, it couldn't freeze history, and it couldn't protect the empires that built it, because every dynasty that expanded it eventually collapsed anyway, proving that no wall, no matter how long, can protect power built on fear, and what truly survives isn't stone, but memory. And if we only remember the wall as a beautiful structure and not a human tragedy, then the wall wins again, because its greatest function was never defense, it was silence. And breaking that silence is the only way the millions who died building the world's longest wall are finally heard. And now comes the final layer of the story, the part that hurts the most, because even after all the suffering, all the deaths, and all the forgotten lives, the world still chose to remember the wall more than the people who built it, turning tragedy into tourism and sacrifice into scenery. And what's even more disturbing is that many of the workers who died were never enemies of the empire. They were its own people. Farmers taken from their fields, sons taken from their families, prisoners taken from their futures, all crushed under the weight of ambition. And yet history books often reduce their pain to a single sentence, while giving entire chapters to the rulers who ordered their deaths. And this tells us something uncomfortable about how humanity remembers the past, because we celebrate power, size, and dominance, but struggle to honor quiet suffering. And the Great Wall became the perfect symbol of that imbalance, massive, visible, unforgettable, while the people behind it remained invisible. And here's the haunting truth. If the wall had never been built, millions would have lived ordinary lives, raised families, grown old, and died naturally. But instead, their lives were shortened to bricks in a political dream. And even today, when people say the Great Wall is one of the greatest achievements in human history, they rarely ask, at what cost? And that silence is the final injustice, because the workers didn't just lose their lives, they lost their stories, their identities, and their place in history. And the real tragedy isn't just that millions died, it's that most of the world moved on without ever knowing their names. And the last reveal of this story is simple but powerful. The Great Wall stands not only as a monument of stone, but as a reminder that when human lives become tools for power, the true cost is never paid by kings, it is paid by the forgotten, and remembering them is the only way to give meaning to the millions who died building the world's longest wall.